OSX users are inept. Here's another one of these completely unedited piece of garbage contents where it's just unrelated footage in the background of like some video game while I talk about something, because this is apparently like the most popular thing on YouTube. Like you see this all the time. I know I've already made like 2 of these, or even 3 of these, but like this is basically what YouTube is now. It's just people talking and there's like gameplay in the background. Anyway, today's topic, as I said before, is OSX users are inept, and there's a very obvious reason because of that. OSX users have no idea how computers work, except a very small minority of them, which keep OSX for very specific reasons. Operating system X, or Mac OS X specifically, Mac OS X, that thing is quite possibly one of the worst operating systems you could ever use on a computer. You literally have no control. On Windows, I mean, you have some level of control. Sorry about the birds, by the way. You have some level of control because you actually, you can customize things. Linux distributions, of course, you have the most level of control. Those are the best operating systems in most cases. Windows, however, you can use proprietary software on it, so that's why people use it. I know this might seem like a rehash of Luke Smith's video on Apple devices, but this is different. I'm talking about why OSX users are inept, like what to do if you are an OSX user and you don't want to be inept. Well, first things first. As I said before, Operating System X, I consider it one of the worst operating systems ever. Why? Well, first of all, an operating system is, by definition, supposed to be as easy to use as possible, or at least not specifically easy to use, but have to have the most functions, and more specifically, it has to work with the programs. Mac OS X, if you take a look at how Mac OS X is made, it's like this overly complicated garbage diagram where it shows all the various components of Mac OS X, all of the stuff. When it pales in comparison to literally anything else. It's this overcomplicated. There's like the FreeBSD in there. There's like the XNU kernel in there. There's like a bunch of other Apple-made proprietary stuff. Basically, it makes developing for Mac OS X platforms impossible. Not impossible, like quite hard. Like making a Mac OS X port of something is harder than making like a Windows port from Linux, or harder to make like a port from Windows to Linux. It's hard to port to OS X, basically, is the point. Xcode and such, not to mention Apple's crazy regulations when it comes to programs. It just shows an example of basically the worst of Windows, which is the, obviously the telemetry and the proprietary stuff, coupled with a twisted version of Linux. So in Linux distributions, if you're a Windows user, you might not know this, or Mac user, you might not know this, but in Linux distributions, your software is not installed via a file you download. At least not maybe in Debian you can do that. You have like .deb files, those kind of are like that, but like it's not like a thing that is common. Basically, the way you're supposed to install programs, you're supposed to use something called a package manager, straight from a PPA, or basically it's basically like an app store. Think of it like that, which Linux community invented. We had the first package managers. We had these even GUI package managers with interfaces. That was first on Linux. Google and Apple did not invent those at all. Well, anyway, the point here is to say that that's not a new thing, and we have it on Linux, and we install our software that way. And more specifically, it's community regulated, so you can't put malware on there. And the great thing about being community moderated, at least for most, like some are not, like I don't know, the Ubuntu ones, if I remember well, are not really like community, that are more controlled, but like, I don't know, the Arch user repository is what I point to, the AUR, that is definitely community maintained. It's this big repository. It's basically, it's like a big source for all of your apps. I hate using the word apps because it's so stupid. It reminds me of Apple operating systems and phones. Computer's not a phone. It's not running a phone ARM processor like operating system, so it's not a phone. But anyway, the AUR is like this big database of things, and it's community maintained. Compare this to something like the Apple Store, the thing you use on your Mac. I don't know what it's called, like App Store. That's what it is. You set on your Macs, and you install software from there. I know you can install software from like DMGs, I think it is, on Macs. That's basically like EXEs or like .debs on Debian. That's pretty stupid, to be honest, because that just makes it just as insecure as Windows, because you just scour around the internet for your friggin' exe file without just having to download. But on Macs, at least, your software has to be verified by Apple, even if it comes via DMG. You actually, when you install a program on a Mac, whether it be DMG or via the App Store, if it's on the App Store, then it's verified. You have to do a bunch of checks and a bunch of controls and a bunch of things. If it's a DMG, you run it, and if Apple doesn't like what it is, if Apple's like, no, well, then it gives you like a little error that says this isn't verified, and then you have to go to your security settings. You gotta enable it. What? Where in the computing world has anybody heard of this? You're trying to install something, and the operating system being like, no, you cannot do this. You have to go and change the settings. Yeah, Windows has that, but like it's much rarer than macOS. macOS, anything that is directly verified, they're like, no, can't do it. That's an obvious limited. Limited number 2 is in terms of the proprietary hardware that you buy it on. Macs are proprietary hardware. They're built from off-the-shelf components, things that are Core i5s, Core i7s, these Intel Core processors, built from normally some of them which has graphics cards, they're NVIDIA graphics cards or sometimes AMD graphics cards and stuff. I don't know about how Macs are made. I'm not here listing off the spec sheets, but I know for a fact that they use off-the-shelf components. But they're packaged in a proprietary special piece of software, special motherboard, special everything, pretty much special firmware and everything, just to make the Mac OS operating system as unusable as possible on other platforms. You cannot download an ISO for Mac OS X. You cannot install it on another computer. It is locked to those products. And some people say, oh, this gives them better performance because they can optimize it for specific things. And that's not true at all. That's garbage, because it's still x86 base. It's still the same operating system if it can run the same programs, and it is still the same hardware itself. Your hardware is the biggest bottleneck when it comes to performance. Deterioration over time, that's up to software, or hard drives and SSDs getting slower. But most of the time, the performance of your device is up to the hardware. So don't give me an excuse that Mac OS X is optimized. It's not. It's not. An argument I see a lot is that it's more secure because it's proprietary. And that's garbage. The only reason it is more secure is because less people use it. Linux is inherently more secure because your programs can only be installed via a package manager. It's all verified and it's all community maintained. It's all secure. It's hard to get some malicious software in the package manager or in a repository that a package manager has access to, because that's not a thing. It has to be verified. You have to community maintained. Just means that people actually check the things and are looking over the source code and looking over the actual the binaries, and it actually is controlled. You might think, oh, well, Apple is controlled. It's not more secure than Linux. If anything, there's more viruses for Mac devices than there are for Linux devices. Windows is obviously the king because it's the majority market share. But the only reason Mac has less viruses is because it's used by less people. If Mac OS X is bigger, then it would probably still be infested with viruses, mostly because people know how to circumvent the whole, the verification step. But it is still stupid that it is there in the first place. So, as I said, another argument that is thrown is, it's more optimized, or something like that, or it's more specifically, it's more reliable. It crashes less. And to that I say, well, it's a Unix system. It will crash less. Most Unix-based computers, most Unix-based operating systems, normally are more stable. And the thing with Mac OS X is that since it is Unix made, it's like Unix modeled after Unix, like Linux distros are, then then you could just use a Linux distro instead. There's nothing about Mac OS X that is special besides the proprietary code that allows you to run certain programs on it. And it absolutely appalls me that so many young people especially are using Mac products. Why? Give me one rational reason that you should use that. People point at the proprietary software Logic Pro, things like Final Cut Pro X. Why? Seriously, their software are fine, but these, all the features in those softwares are available in literally everything else, either on Windows or in some cases even on Linux. There's literally nothing about the softwares that makes them special besides the fact that Apple could create a walled code. The only reason they are so good, quote unquote, is because Apple can control every single aspect of them to give you the best impression of it. Well, in truth, it's all still proprietary garbage. It is all still proprietary and bad. So then there is the fact that people think Macs look good, the actual hardware. Well, first of all, I'm not critiquing the actual hardware. I'm talking about OSX specifically. The hardware itself, your computer should not be a fashion statement. It should represent you. You shouldn't be represented by your computer. The computer should represent you. You know, you're putting stickers on it and stuff like that. That's cute, but like in the end, if you buy a Mac, then that basically just that flags you as an idiot. Basically, either an idiot, or if your Mac is running some kind of, I don't know, Linux distribution or something like that, that maybe not exactly less of an idiot. Yeah. So please do not, like, the Mac OS X, there's no reason to use it. And don't give the argument of, oh, it works, so I'm not going to change it. I'm going to just, that level of neutrality, the level of just sitting there and not changing things, that's the reason why there's so many problems in terms of software. That's the reason why we have all the problems we have in the modern day life, is because people sat there and said, oh, I'm just not going to do anything about it. It's these little things that will make your life better and better. Things like, I don't know, changing your operating system, using something more stable like a Linux distribution, or using something more compatible like Windows, for example. Not boot camping, fully installing Windows 10 as if it was the primary operating system. It's not hard. It's easy to do. It's not something you don't need to call tech support to do it. You don't. It's not something only hackers can do. It's a very simple process. I did it when I was 10. I reinstalled an operating system when I was 10. If I can do it when I'm 10, I'm pretty sure you can do it as well. Okay, so now to the actual steps of what to do if you're a Mac OS X user. First of all, chances are if you are a Mac OS X user and not using a Hackintosh, then you're obviously using the kind of Apple proprietary hardware. In that case, step one is to install a different operating system. So you can go with Windows if you want all that compatibility, but it is still proprietary. It still spies on you. It still does all that bad things. It still is, Windows. I mean, that's good if you want to run more games. Linux is actually compatible with more games than the Mac. Not as many as Windows, but more than Mac. So there's that. Switch to a Linux distribution if you don't consider your computer usage, that if your computer's like function does not require proprietary software, like, I don't know, a Microsoft Office, this kind of proprietary things that you can only get on Mac OS X and Windows 10. Because Microsoft Office, obviously not the online version. The online version works on anything, but the actual software itself has not been ported to Linux distributions yet, although we are getting close to it. Microsoft Teams got ported over. Visual Studio Code, although pretty unrelated, got ported over, so eventually maybe yes. So unless you need specific, very specific software, like that you can only get on Windows, then feel free to use a Linux distribution and installing it on your Mac. If you need to know how to install an operating system, then please know. If you're using your computer to a certain level that you would consider a level that you would consider like an expert level, or a level in a way that you spend most of your time on it. I don't know, browsing Facebook all day. Like, you can do that on literally any device. Just install a Linux distribution. It means that not only are you doing the same things you did on Mac, but you're also, running free software, as in freedom. You're running LibreSoft or open source, and there's no telemetry. Well, there obviously still is, because Apple probably puts chips in there that scan your memory. Modern Intel chips have it, Intel Management Engine, that can scan your RAM and see everything that's currently going on. So there's that. There's also the fact that pretty much every single Mac probably listens to everything you say. I know for a fact that Siri does that. That's in this license agreement, which you should read, by the way. You should read license agreements. Unless, of course, you use free software. you don't have any license agreements. Not free as in money, once again. Free as in freedom license under the GNU public license, or some other, permissive license. Macs are bad, is basically my point. If people also give the argument of oh, why should I switch to a Linux distribution if it works for me now? Like, why shouldn't you? What reasons do you have to say Mac? It spies on you. It's bad. It's controlled by Apple. They can take things away whenever they want. I mean, Windows updates whenever it wants. I'm pretty sure Mac OS X does that as well. It changes things whenever it wants. It has the right to. By the license agreement, it does have the right to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, when you don't want it to. That's not a problem with Linux distributions. Switch to a better operating system, please. Just simply because it is more efficient. It will make you run Libre software. If you're running Linux, it will increase the Linux market share, which is more beneficial because it means more open source and free software is developed, which is beneficial not only to you but to everyone. The developers, which means they can integrate free and open source libraries into their software, which benefits you, of course. And don't come up with the argument of, oh, like I said before, people come up with this argument that, oh, it works. Why should I change it if it works? If things used to work for me, I changed them anyway, simply because I wanted something different. I wanted specifically to remove a malicious functionality. You shouldn't change things when they don't work, when they break. No, you should change them when they're bad. When it comes to software, unless you're spending money, of course. Windows 10 costs money. Linux distributions are free, for example, completely free, and it's completely free as long as you have like a little USB flash stick thing. You can pretty much install any operating system on any relatively modern computer just via that. Pretty much every single Linux distro can do that. There's literally no reason to have the argument that, oh, it just works, it's fine, I can just remain neutral, I can just not do anything about it. Change things when they're bad. Don't change them when they break when it comes to software. If you just sit there and just let everything happen, don't take control, and more specifically, don't change your operating system simply because it's still working, that's a bad attitude to go for. If you can use something better, then change to it. Like, well, why would you not do that? Well, anyway, thanks for listening to some Zoomer rant about hipster Apple users for like 20 minutes straight. I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.